Welcome everyone to this week's episode of The Sixth Dimension. We are celebrating 100 episodes of this podcast. Yay! And we're celebrating this with Nathan Hill. Welcome.
Buddy, thank you so much for having me on this epic number.
And we are talking about death.
Death. I was almost gonna go death by stereo. It's
This isn't a Lost Boys episode, no.
This is the death toll.
Exactly.
2017 celebrity death match. No, yeah, man, it's epic. This is huge. I mean, I can't believe you're on 100 episodes. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, and thank you earlier as well. I forgot to thank you for that compliment that you made. But yeah, thank you, and I couldn't have done it without you. You stepped in, I think, about episode 45, I think it was.
Oh, wow. Came in halfway.
Yeah, and I think you were 32 in terms of interviewing. So,
that's awesome.
So after around about less than 20 episodes, you were like, I wouldn't mind getting my finger in this pie. And to tell you the truth, you've made this a lot more enjoyable, great experience for me in terms of learning.
Thank you. Oh, mate, it's been awesome, and it's been a great platform and a means to get other voices heard and get some of our local indie scene artists heard, and also our mutual friends and colleagues and whatnot, and the networking. And it was great. I mean, when I was down at the last festival and bumped into a couple of people, and then I realised, they've been on the Sixth Dimension, and so even socially and in the local scene, it's been a real coup. It's been great.
Yeah, people have been commenting on the quality, and it has been improving. But that's just a numbers game. Woody Allen does 100 movies. Of course, a couple of them are going to be good every now and then, but. So, but the difference is I don't want to marry my adopted stepdaughter. So
keep our train on the tracks for this pod. I think as we know, there's a lot going on in the industry right now that I think with the Harvey Weinstein and obviously the Richard and the Melbourne Underground thing recently, and there's a lot of politics and there's a lot of people taking sides and whatnot. And I stand with you when I say that we're very we stand neutral ground, we push forward, and we go towards the light. And hopefully the people we're about to talk to also went towards the light. Because this episode, as you said, it's about the death toll, isn't it? And this has been another crazy, shocking year for celebrity death. I remember being in the studio with Richard Sorrell. I was doing the interview with Tommy Hellfire.
Yep.
And we were talking about celebrity death, actually, and Richard turned and said, well, you know what? We're all going to the same place. And I stopped and thought, God, he's right. It doesn't really matter who you are and how famous you are or how famous you're not. We are all going to the same place at the end of the day. So, or I should say the end of our life. So live it hopefully positively as we can, that we're about to speak of. They've lived epic lives and careers. And it's like that line in The Doors, it's like, did you live a life worth living enough to base a movie on?
Before we get into meat and potatoes of this thing, Nathan came up with this topic, and I just really responded to it because the whole notion of this podcast anyway, not just this episode, is cinema itself is kind of dead in that it's going through a flux of change. Okay, so the notion of death itself is an archetype within cinema and literature as a semblance of change. So it represents change. Death is something that's too tragic to sometimes approach. So if it happens to us, to someone we know or love, it can be too overwhelming, or we can be too overwhelmed by emotions to consider the importance, or dare I say, the positivity of death. And hence why I think it's important to look at the people who have passed either this year or the people who have passed recently, either in 2016 or even 2009, that have had importance to us in everyday life. But it allows us to reflect on a semblance of the character rather than relative died. It's very hard to recognize their importance when you're too busy weeping into a pillow. Death in cinema, literature, any other art form allows us to approach this change a lot more gingerly and reflect on the positivity of change, especially as dramatic as death.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a movie like, the new Rambo and he's going for a body count, you're not really sort of, grieving over the numbers of guys that are being, or the scores of guys being shot. It becomes almost like a video game. There's that complete detachment. But if it's a movie like Philadelphia, and you've got Denzel and Tom Hanks, you grow to love these characters over 2 years, you're in tears yourself. I mean, Beaches is a classic example. You know, there wasn't a woman that watched Beaches with Barbara Streisand in the 80s that wasn't crying themselves to sleep after that one. Death itself can be portrayed in certain ways. You know, Lord of the Ring, Grey Haven. In my opinion, there's never been a better, exit sequence in cinema. You know, or maybe I need to watch some more movies. But, you know, it can be done in such a fantastic way. You know, good direction is one that makes you really grieve the character's loss. Means, you know, you've done your job, I think.
I would agree. And also, I would argue that every single death within cinema is important, not individually on an individual basis, like whether it reflects the genre or the narrative intent of that film. So, for example, you mentioned the latest Rambo movie where he just sprays down, you know, a bunch of Viet Cong, or actually, I think they're Cambodian in that film. You know, what does that represent to the storyline? Well, that is sort of reflective of the ferocity of the character's pent-up rage. So he's able to wipe out, you know, basically a nation and a half with a machine gun just in one fell swoop because it represents his rage.
That's also in a hyper reality in a fantastical way, because there were those stories of Arnie and Stallone back Hollywood in the day. You know, he'd done Rambo, the other one done Commando, and they would sort of, you know, taunt each other and say, "What's your body count on this film?" You know, and they would try and up the ante on each other. You know,
I'm trying to think who would have won in that situation.
I think Arnie technically won back then with Commando, but then Stallone got him later with the later Rambos.
The latest Rambo has something like 256 kills or something.
He was basically trying to top Commando, I think, at the time.
It's a pity that these people are sort of hanging on to their action clothes, I guess, where you've got someone like Keanu Reeves who's trying to stretch himself as an actor. He recognizes that, you know, he doesn't necessarily fly, even though, you know, John Wick, he's pretty good. He's not necessarily the staple action star that he was when, let's say, The Matrix happened. That's another form of change. So he puts to death that character of Neo, but then he takes on more challenging roles. Like, arguably his best role is in Eli Roth's 2015 film Knock Knock, and he plays a father. And did you know that Keanu Reeves had never played a father up until 2015? He was 50 years old.
That's incredible. It's funny to mention that as well. I was talking to a friend yesterday about that, an actor, and about how they'd been asked to play a mother, and they just thought, no, I don't want to, because as soon as I do that, you know, my career is going to change. You know, and that's true. I mean, I think actors trying to keep the childhood spirit alive and preserve themselves, as well as being a chameleon, but to extend their looks and preserve their childhood and their spirit as long as they can before the actual human body starts to work against you in that way. Shall we start with the celebrity death toll, my friend?
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk, because I know you're obviously brushing now on actual death in cinema, but I wanted to talk a bit about some of these people, these giant stars and celebs that have passed, that is kind of heartbreaking. I know we're going back, David Bowie.
Yeah, he died in 2016, didn't he?
I mean, I've got a list here that goes back probably a couple of years. I feel like I'm still kind of trying to get over some of these celebrity deaths that have been in the past year to 2 years, even 3 years. I just feel like I haven't even caught up, you know, and I just feel like life's moving at such a rapid rate, which I'm sure everyone can relate to, where, you know, you don't get that much reflection time. Bowie, I mean, look, as far as his movies go, you know, Man Who Fell to Earth, just bought a re-release recently and absolutely adore it. I love him in Labyrinth. I love him in The Hunger. Who doesn't? And I mean, his legacy, those last two tracks that he released, they're just epic. They're cryptic. They're a puzzle. They're genius. Undisputed. He went out gracefully, knew exactly what he was doing and was calculative. And I can tell you this, my friend Richard Norton, who actually was his bodyguard, his personal bodyguard for quite some time, I asked him, because I didn't get to meet Bowie personally, but I did see him in concert up quite close, which was also epic. But I asked Richard, I said, you know, what was David Bowie like? And he said he was very quiet behind the scenes. He didn't really like to be in the press. He just liked to do his work. He was a creative. He didn't like BS. and he just worked, and he would try and stay out of the media as much as he can and only use it when he wanted to release his work. So, that to me that's a true artist. So all they were really interested in was doing their work, use their time to their advantage whilst they're on the planet. And he's passed at the age of 69. So, that's a pretty awesome innings.
It is, until you realise that Fats Domino was 93 when he died a few weeks ago, a couple of days ago, yeah. Before we go on to the most incredible death, Carrie Fisher, Debbie Reynolds, twofer, basically, I guess is what you can call it, where they died one after the other, essentially.
God, yeah.
One died of a broken heart and one died of grief. But what's your favourite Bowie album?
Quite a big fan of that Labyrinth soundtrack. There's a few songs on there that I kind of grew up with. So, yeah, but I think it was more about the songs. I think him playing Tesla,
The Prestige,
was absolutely phenomenal casting.
It was interesting, yeah. I didn't think he was that great, but he's not designed to be a good actor. He's a really good presence. And that's what
right.
You use David Bowie for. If you give him like the direction that Stella Adler gave Marlon Brando or something like that, just keep your head to the ground and keep your chin to the ground and your teeth closed and just say your lines.
If Bowie had already passed and they went to cast Tesla, the first person that springs to my mind is someone like Steve Buscemi.
Okay, interesting.
The other person to play would have been Jeremy Irons.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
The celebrity death that still affects me is Christopher Lee.
Okay, yeah. Why is that?
I think I was rooting for him. I really wanted him to hit the century. He's died at 93. It was just so good that he managed to finish The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Maybe if he didn't get it in the bag, he was going to pass. That's kind of how I sort of see it. Yeah, and, because he met J.R. Tolkien personally, and he almost begged Peter Jackson to play Gandalf. And then when he said no, that would have crushed him. But then he said, but you can play Saruman. It was just genius. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so I grew up with Christopher Lee, not personally, but I grew up with Christopher Lee.
We wish.
Watching Hammer movies and such like that. Okay, so yeah, Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher, they died simultaneously, which was incredibly spooky.
The feeling I got from it was the mother almost chasing her into the afterlife. That's how I read it.
Yeah, I was a lot more cynical than I said, and I thought, holy shit, my daughter's not going to top me. It's like in the fame charts, and then I thought, because I don't know, have you seen the movie Postcards from the Edge, which was based on a book written by Carrie Fisher about, a veiled biography of her relationship with her mother, which was, the film was directed by Mike Nichols and starred Meryl Streep as Carrie Fisher and Shirley MacLaine as Debbie Reynolds, not with those names, with pseudonyms as well. But they had a very volatile relationship about who exactly would be more famous than who. And there was that very famous sort of scene wherein Meryl Streep's character is, just because she pops pills and all she has to do is pass out on the street and she's back in the tabloids. Well, her mum does an award-winning show that she sweats her ass off singing and dancing on stage for 6 hours. She's only made second page. It was a very dark joke and I liked it, but you could sort of sense I think the reason why it was funny because it was true, probably.
Can I also just backtrack a little bit on the Christopher Lee?
Yeah, sure.
Did you know that his credits on IMDb is 280?
Wow.
I think he was possibly one of the actors with the most credits, which was leading me into my next celebrity death, which really stung, was John Hurt. And John Hurt has gone out with 205 credits. My favorite films of his were obviously The Elephant Man and the voice of Strider in the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings. Yeah. And I also adored...
Alien?
No, the one in the prison.
Oh, Midnight Express.
Midnight Express, thank you, brother. I've got the soundtrack. That's just, that was epic. But he's died at age 77, so that's pretty good innings. But 205 credits, that's just ridiculous. And
I would say a lot of John Hurt's credits are probably pretty respectable, as opposed to Christopher Lee. Yeah, he did a lot of shit like Meat Cleaver Massacre, which was made 1976.
You can tell that he's really just staying in the industry, though. Like at times where it's up and down, he's still working and he's still taking a paycheck. I think that's what it's about for him. He was just consistent. He seemed to be a character that was just always on a film.
I think you're right, and it was a pity because he really thought he could sing, and I never thought he really could, because if you listen to him, he just does that deep voice thing where it's just he sort of, all he has to do is talk in melody. You know, it's like what Rex Harrison did in My Fair Lady, because he couldn't sing. He just talked with pitch, and therefore it sounded like he was singing. But he does a really cool... He was actually in a few Australian films. One film in particular that I did like of Christopher Lee's was Return of Captain Invincible, starring Alan Arkin. One of the funniest... It's directed by Philip Mora, the guy who did The Howling Part 2 and 3, Marsupials.
Oh, yes, now I know. Yeah.
And it's a musical film that apparently was, people argue, was sort of remade as the movie Hancock, starring Will Smith, about a retired alcoholic superhero who's given up on the world. And when it comes time to straighten up, he has to take on the baddest of the bad guys in order to save the world. And but this film was a musical, Return of Captain Invincible, and had some really cool musical scenes. It was sort of like, I guess, Australia's attempt at the Rocky Horror Picture Show, even though arguably the progenitors of Rocky Horror Picture Show were, the people who made it were Australian. There's a really funny song in that film for Return of Captain Invincible called Bullshit, which is just the word bullshit over and over and over again. And if you get the chance, I'll put it up on our Facebook page. It's really funny.
Jesus. One of the biggest, I think, really is Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, that didn't really hit me too hard.
Is that a generational thing, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for a lot of people who are a bit older than me, they really identified with the art house film Paris, Texas, and I think they identified with his character as sort of the wary, lonesome wanderer.
If you look at his credits list, he's finished on a clean 200, which is just ridiculous. He's lived to 91, and I'm just amazed that he was able to sneak in the new Twin Peaks before he passed. I think that is quite poignant.
Yeah, I could sort of tell, though, when I watched Twin Peaks. I was like, yeah, he's on his way out. He really doesn't look good. Like, he's either on a lot of painkillers or he's just gone. It was too hard to watch. I mean, there were a lot of things for me that were hard to watch from Twin Peaks, but that's just personally.
Yeah.
I did like it, but it was just really hard to watch. I have to watch it again, though, I think. But yeah, Harry Dean Stanton, he was in a lot of David Lynch films. He was even in Inland Empire, which is, I think, probably... I don't know, have you seen Inland Empire?
Yeah, I have.
I'm impressed.
And it was really, unless you're a hardcore Lynch fan, it's very hard to watch. And this was when Lynch was really publishing in a digital video age, and he pretty much grabbed a camera and said, I can shoot a movie any way I want, and I think this is a constant thing that happens with him, where the exit to the studio system has been so barbaric that he's really embraced indie filmmaking. And that's why he's got so many followers, because he's really got both sides of the fence, But Inland was very hard to watch if you weren't, a kind of a Lynch connoisseur. But yeah, look, Harry Dean, I mean, Jesus, he's a cinema icon. He's got a huge fan base around the world. But moving on, man, why don't we talk about, I don't know if you know this guy, but this was a series that kind of scared me as a kid. It was called Catweasel.
Yeah, I know of it. I've seen a few episodes. Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, ABC once or twice, but yeah.
It used to frighten me. There was something about this seedy old man character. It was kind of scary for a young kid. Jeffrey Bailden, and he was 93.
Wow.
When he passed, so he had a huge innings. If you go onto his IMDB, it's quite extensive as well. But that was an interesting passing, because again, these guys they age, and you don't watch their current stuff, and then they kind of pass, and you go, oh wow, I remember that guy. Some people probably think I thought he already was dead. I hate to say that. He's sitting on 219 credits. I mean, this guy's been around a long time. He's actually known for a movie called Horror of Dracula, which is made in 1958.
That was the very first Dracula film from Hammer Studios, and that's the one that put Christopher Lee on the map.
Same with Peter Cushing. So what a huge lineup that was.
Cushing, Lee, Catweasel.
Moving along, did you want to mention someone?
Yeah, I do. I mean, right now there were a few filmmakers that did have quite an impact on not just me and you, but also an entire generation of film fans. George Romero died of lung cancer at the age of 77.
That's huge.
And quite honestly, I thought, he was going to go on longer than the zombies that he was photographing. I thought he was going to keep making dead films as long. Because, I mean, those films, there was basically, with exception for the year, no, there was basically a Living Dead film that he made in every decade from the 60s onwards. For almost 60 years, he was making successful movies. Now, that's more than Wes Craven, who died in 2014, which we'll go on to a bit later.
It's a true legend who's done, like you said, a massive work, every decade. It's similar to kind of a Kubrick in a sense where, he's only made a brilliant film with what he's got. Otherwise, he hasn't. 77 with quite a lot of wins as well. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of respect there.
And I will say it's a couple of films that aren't so good, but in comparison to filmmakers like Wes Craven or John Landis or,
John Carpenter or something.
Yeah, or even John Carpenter. Yeah. Romero seemed to have that integrity all the way through that those filmmakers kind of didn't. And
the thing that I like about Romero, though, is he stayed true to his genre. Do you know what I mean? He really stuck with it. He didn't veer out and do too many other movies that weren't kind of his style. He remained pretty loyal to his genre.
Yeah, you're right. And initially, the first film that he made after Night of the Living Dead, the very first film that was a hit of his, which was originally going to be a Bergman rip-off type film that he was going to make instead of Night of the Living Dead, because that was the type of films that he was going to see. But the very first film that they made after that was a drama that really didn't do well. It was called There's Always Vanilla. And because of that experience, he virtually never made a non-horror film or non-supernatural film afterwards.
I see. Yeah.
And so, because those were the films where he could essentially work and do what he loved, but also express himself as fully as possible. We wouldn't have gotten masterpieces like Dawn of the Dead, like Martin, which I think is probably his best film. We wouldn't have got The Dark Half even, which is a really well-made one. And Monkey Shines, which is, even though it's silly, it's still really well made.
Huge.
We wouldn't have got those films without the failure of his dip into the dramatic films.
I think moving on from him, then the perfect next person to speak about is Tobe Hooper.
Yes, yeah, who really only had one great film, but as Orson Welles says, you only need one.
Well, Tobe Hooper, I'm quite fond of. I mean, there was, once in my life where he actually personally wished me a happy birthday, and then I think I told you the story before, where my first night in LA ever, and I'd actually met and then had dinner with Gunnar Hansen, who's Leatherface.
Really?
Oh yeah. So there was quite an affiliation I found with just myself, and it was interesting when years later Nicholas Winding Refn came out and said Tobe Hooper's favourite and that Texas Chainsaw was his favourite film, and then he did a tribute screening, and you can see in the footage that Hooper was quite touched by. He was almost in tears. So, he was genuinely seemed like a really nice guy. Yeah, look, Texas Massacre, I actually rewatched it recently just to see if it sort of stands up, and it does. I mean, the original is still frightening. You can see why it did so well.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as hard now to sort of go out there and attempt to do something like it. You've just got to really get down and dirty. And I think when it was made, it was probably a film that took some risks and naturally, as he had to, because he was starting out. I think we talked about this when I did the Tomboys. You had to do something horrific to make noise, and I feel like there's a bit of a parallel there.
Absolutely, and usually the most horrific of these filmmakers who have died recently, they're the ones that made the most noise. Dawn of the Dead is George Romero's most popular. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is his most popular.
That's right, Craven with Nightmare, and Carpenter with Halloween, and then the list just goes on.
Exactly, yeah.
Just want to pause you there.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing is too that I realise as well is when you look at your movie maniacs, your standouts obviously being Mike Myers, Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface. We think so much about the iconic characters that they portrayed, which have still stood the test of time, and they're still now making brand new action figures of all these characters.
Yeah,
they continue to do so. It's the filmmaker that's responsible for that. It's the scriptwriter and the director that have brought these characters to life. And I think people forget that.
And you, as a filmmaker, how do you come up with something like a legendary caricature like Michael Myers, or Freddy Krueger. Like,
I don't think you can come up with a character and say to yourself, I'm going to create this character because it's going to be iconic.
as we know with the movie Hatchet that came out in 2006, you can't just what's called.
You can't just say, "Oh, my next film's going to be an iconic character." That's just not how it works. There's just too many dynamics, and it's really the public that are going to embrace that character. I mean, look what happened with John Jarratt and with Creed. Perfect example. To some people, he might have just been, an Aussie, desert outback kind of bogan with a flannelette shirt who's a bit of a creep and likes to kill backpackers. How did they know he was going to be an action figure? So it's really the public, and I think it's anything that does well at the box office that determines then whether merchandise is also going to sell, and then over time becomes an iconic monster movie maniac or iconic monster figure. Shall we move along, buddy? I was going to mention Hugh Hefner.
Yeah, and that meant nothing to me, basically. I mean, but to you grew up with Playboy, and I'd never even seen a Playboy except in movies, basically.
To me, it was more about the social aspect because, he was this iconic figure that, would quite often pop up in movies. Like he played himself even in Beverly Hills Cop 2, I think it was. He just obviously, how much I love Corey Feldman. Feldman would spend a lot of time at the mansion. A lot of celebrities do.
Really?
Absolutely. The Playboy Mansion is a place to hang out. You could only get in there if you're personally invited, and if you weren't invited, you try to figure out how to be invited. But Feldman would go up there at least like once a month or something and chill out, and he wouldn't be afraid to say it. So I mean, it's just the fact that he's been around for so long. I mean, he's passed at 91, which is also an epic innings. But had a lot of influence in the film industry.
That's right, yeah, especially in terms of censorship.
Do you know that he's played himself over 250 times in an IMDb cred, and he's also produced over 200 productions?
He produced Roman Polanski's film Macbeth, which is the best version of Macbeth. And
absolutely. Yeah. And now I'm glad you brought that up, Seb, because you're leading us into our next person, because at the end of that film, when he puts whose head is it on the stick
Macbeth's
at the end?
head is on the stick.
Okay, and you know that it was actually crafted to look like someone in real life. Did you know this story?
No.
Are you serious? You don't know?
No, I don't know this story.
Well, it was because it was around about the time of the Tate murders, and it was actually, there's a rumor that Polanski had asked the artist to make it resemble the face of Manson.
Really?
Now, I've gone back and watched it, and it was actually it was scary the second time I watched it, because I actually think that rumor's true. The more I looked at that shot and the head on the stake, the more it looked like Manson. Isn't that amazing? So go back and have a look yourself. This leads us into our next celebrity death, which is obviously Charles Manson. So we're talking another 83. This friggin' number keeps popping up. Your thoughts?
I have read the Helter Skelter murders, or Helter Skelter as it's known, and it really did have an impact on me on how much the extent a murder on the other side of the world can essentially ripple across all cultures. I think at its worst, the murders represented the worst of humankind, that not only people could destroy the life of a woman bearing life, but also that, it could overshadow the invasion from the Khmer Rouge of Cambodia, invading Cambodia essentially, where it was the Tate murder was page 1 on the media, on the news, and the invasion was on page 2.
My favourite movie in the genre is the 1976 Helter Skelter,
with Steve Railsback as Charles Manson.
You do know that Tarantino's new film is going to be based on the Tate. Well, it's going to be based in around the time and the period, which will also involve the Tate murder scene. Did you know that?
I did, and I've got the official synopsis right here. Quentin Tarantino has written the script, and the synopsis is: an out-of-work actor and his stunt double are looking for work in 1969 Los Angeles, set during the backdrop of the Tate LaBianca murders by Charles Manson, or at least orchestrated by Charles Manson, which sort of, for Tarantino fan, it echoes not only Death Proof, but also has sort of overtones of Pulp Fiction as well.
It does.
I really can't wait to see. I love Tarantino's movies. I don't like him. He's a bit weird.
Well, man, here's the amazing thing, bro.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt is attached, and I just heard recently that Cruise might be in this.
Yeah, Cruise is supposed to play Charles Manson's character, allegedly.
Are you kidding?
No, that's allegedly the news.
When you mentioned Cruise, I thought of I think one of his best performances was in Tropic Thunder. Les Grossman, like he nailed that.
He plays bad guys really well. He played Lestat in Interview with a Vampire,
Epic.
and that's probably his best role in terms of acting. Yeah, and I'm trying to think of other bad guys he's played. He probably hasn't really played any bad guys.
There's Collateral.
Oh yeah, Collateral. He's really good in that too.
Did you want to mention another celebrity death?
Well, so there's a couple of other ones that really took me by surprise. Jonathan Demme really took me by surprise, mainly because he didn't get the chance to make another masterpiece after Silence of the Lambs, because that film actually ruined his career in a sense. It made him a really successful director, but the problem is Jonathan Demme was known as a left-wing warrior. He was a champion for gay rights, equal rights. He was really a really good guy by all accounts and to everyone who knew him. Then all of a sudden he is picked to make the movie Silence of the Lambs. Now, as we all know, the main killer in that film believed himself to be transgender. He wasn't transgender. Buffalo Bill was not transgender, but he thought he was. And so he would kill women and wear their skins and sort of justify that as... And so what a lot of people thought was, well, he's homophobic. They didn't look at any of his other credits beforehand. They said, well, the left-wing press said he was homophobic. And therefore, after Silence of the Lambs, he went from critics' darling to critics' black sheep, essentially. And so what does he make right after Silence of the Lambs? He makes Philadelphia, which is an incredibly inclusive sort of filibuster underdog movie, if there ever was any. Brilliantly orchestrated. I don't like it. I think it's really saccharine, but it's really smart movie, casting Tom Hanks as the main AIDS victim. I mean, everyone roots for Tom Hanks, no matter what gender or sexuality you are. You look to Tom Hanks as a nice guy that you can relate to. Anyway, Jonathan Demme still made films that were worthwhile after Silence of the Lambs. It's just none stood up to it.
I was going to say good innings at 73, and at least he won an Oscar. So that's. But what I found strange is that his last movie was a short film.
I thought it was Ricky and the Flash, but yeah, no, I didn't. What was the short film?
Last film was called The Power of Rock, and it's a short film.
Tom Petty we lost this year as well.
There you go.
But yeah, back on Jonathan Demme, because the filmmakers are there. I think his last feature film was Ricky and the Flash, which was a Meryl Streep movie. It was sort of like an ode to the baby boom generation for the millennials. It was really not a good film. It was pretty boring.
We know this can happen where we get these directors in the sweet spot, and I think even Tarantino said that you pray that you can keep going, but sometimes you don't know when you've already peaked, and sometimes you don't even realize it as a filmmaker. But I was going to move on to changing gear a little bit here. I was going to say Roger Moore.
Yeah, again, really has very little resonance for me, but for a lot of people I know, base their lives around his version of James Bond.
89 years of age. Daniel Craig has said that Roger was his favourite, and Daniel Craig has finally, thank God, agreed to do the next Bond film as well, which I think will be his last. That'll cap off the genre for him, because he originally wasn't a 5-picture deal, so that'll be the 5th, which comes out late 2018. So I'm hanging for that.
Sure.
But Roger Moore, I mean, yeah, he really was quite a favourite for that era. He's gone out at 89 with 95 credits.
That's insane. My favourite role of Roger Moore's was in The Wild Geese with Richard Burton and Richard Harris and the other guy. I can't remember his name. But yeah, I love that film. Have you ever seen The Wild Geese? Where it's basically
I know it, but I can't remember seeing it.
It's basically Inglourious Bastards, but instead of Jewish young men, it's old men.
I was going to say, did you ever see him in The Quest with Van Damme?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I have seen The Quest, where they have to, it's sort of like, it's kind of a bit similar to Mortal Kombat. They have to go to an island, and the movie Mortal Kombat, where they have to go to an island and fight each other, basically.
Yeah, there's a few movies like that at the time, like they were sort of either trying to redo Enter the Dragon, or they were trying to redo Bloodsport. I think, again, it was the genre. Now, what do you think of Sam Shepard?
Well, Sam Shepard, he sort of came into my consciousness as a musician. He was in the band The Holy Model Rollers. He was the drummer and the singer And he did that song, "If You Want to Be a Bird," which I think was his most famous song. And those two songs were featured in the movie Easy Rider. He liked to be recognized as a playwright. You know, he was a Pulitzer Prize winner, which is a really strange combination. You know, have rock singer and Pulitzer Prize winner. Except Bob Dylan won a Pulitzer Prize for, I don't know. I think the judges that year were probably high or something. But Sam Shepard, he was always a really, really good actor in terms of feeling natural. And I think it's important sometimes to get those types of actors who don't seem to even know that a camera's there. Not that they're not acting for the camera, because as you know, you as an actor know you have to put on a performance for the actor. You have to acknowledge the perspective of the camera.
The character.
And the camera flattens everything, so you've got to move in a certain way. You've got to underplay things or overplay things sometimes. It just seemed as though he didn't care, like he was completely natural for it.
Yeah, I think a great example of that was his character in Black Hawk Down.
Yes,
it was just he's a very dry style, very, very casual almost, and very, like you said, very observatory. And I think that was his kind of mojo. That was his thing. And you know, some actors can pull it off, and others can't. You got to be careful with that, I think, too, because that sort of lazy, dry style, if you don't have the talent to back it up, then you'll just kind of come off as pretentious. It's a tricky, fine line there for that type of style of acting.
Well, people did accuse Sam Shepard of being pretentious. I mean, there's a bunch of his plays that are really just, if you read them, they're really, really pretentious. I mean, there's one play called Simpatico, which is a Western science fiction play, Brechtian abstract dialogue, and it really, really does feel quite painful in how separate from the narrative what's going on in front of you is. He was known for that, and I think the one that was the Pulitzer Prize winning one, which was Buried Child, dispensed of all that. It was actually quite Hemingway-esque. It was very, very, you know, the truth is in the words. And that's when Sam Shepard was strongest. But he's only got two plays that are like that. Fool for Love and Buried Child, which are his most popular plays. Coincidentally, his best role arguably is in the movie, for me, it's in Fool for Love, the Robert Altman version of the film, and also Days of Heaven by Terrence Malick. Like, Richard Gere's a good actor, but there's a lot of artifice to him. There's a lot of baggage. There's no baggage with Sam Shepard. So if you see them up on screen together, like Shepard just shits all over Gere.
It's amazing you said that too, because, you know, I always think back to Richard Gere, and you know, he's very particular in his style, you know, and I think that you watch a Gere movie, it almost needs to be Gere at the helm of it for it to work. Because when you see him go up against Norton in Primal Fear, he just absolutely killed him in performance. Do you remember that?
Do you mean Norton killed Gere or Gere killed Norton?
Yeah, Norton killed Gere as well. You know, it was almost like the beginning of the end for Gere, I felt. And that was years ago. You know?
Pity the ending of that film throws toasters in the water.
Primal Fear?
Yeah, it's clever, but it just, like, when I first saw it, I was like, whoa. But then after I kept watching it, or watched it over and over again, I was like, I don't know, there's just something wrong with it. It just seems a bit too many holes, I think. But
that's funny.
I think it's a once-watch film for me, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's actually probably too clever for me. Anyway. Now,
I'm going to throw a name at you, see if it means anything. Martin Landau.
Bela Lugosi in Ed Wood. And also Mission Impossible, but, you know, he was quite a popular man.
And he's gone out at 89 with 175 credits.
What about you? What does he mean to you?
Yeah, look, I think Ed Wood for me was a pinnacle moment. I wasn't really he wasn't in my orbit when I was growing up. I was looking at sort of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and Vincent Price, and but yeah, it wasn't until I saw Ed Wood that he really stood out for me. So they came into their own in their own skin when they were kind of a little bit older. But I mean, for Landau, at least he's gone out with an Oscar at 89. It's a huge innings.
Crime and Punishment, the Woody Allen film, that sort of, I think, is his best role, where he plays it like a really, really conflicted character that's executed well. Crimes and Misdemeanors, not Crime and Punishment. So basically, the film's about two guys, Woody Allen and Martin Landau, and the two separate narratives. Woody Allen has a small dilemma, and Martin Landau has a big dilemma. But they're both at the same amount of guilt. And in the end, it sort of shows that they're both suffering for different crimes, but in the same way. You know, one was like really petty, like it wouldn't even register, but Martin Landau's was murder and covering up a murder. And essentially it shows you the complexity of what crime is. That should you feel guilty? If you don't feel guilty, what would happen? It's a really interesting movie.
What about good old Gene Wilder?
Gene Wilder, yeah. To me, he represented the epitome of untapped potential. His best work for me was with Richard Pryor in Silver Streak and what was the other one? Silver Streak and...
Stir Crazy?
Stir Crazy, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and Another Year.
Yeah, I was thinking of Stir Crazy. You know, I saw a funny interview once with Richard Pryor. And, you know, because they actually, you know, that movie is obviously shot in a prison and they had gone to a real prison to do a lot of this stuff. And Gene apparently was, you know, nice, young, fun, you know, I'm not going to say naive, but, you know, silly, fun Gene. And, you know, jumped into this scene with all the prisoners and Pryor was kind of like, dude, get out of there. You know, like it was almost like, what are you doing? You know, like he was afraid he was going to be mobbed or you know, pray for something not worse than that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Wilder, what are we looking at? 83 years old, nominated for 2 Oscars, gone out with 37 credits. Yeah, not as many credits as the other guys, but definitely, as you said, untapped, pure potential, and it's absolutely undisputed that you know, he'll be forever known as Willy Wonka.
Exactly, and that's a pity because he could have had a lot more, because he tried to go the Woody Allen route, and I don't mean molesting. I mean that, allegedly molesting. I mean that he could have written and directed his own material, and he did. He wrote and directed an okay film for the 1970s, an okay comedy called Sherlock Holmes's Younger, Smarter Brother. It's not Annie Hall, but he needed an Annie Hall in order to make it big, I think, in order to showcase his skills as sort of like this neurotic everyman's man for that generation. But the problem was he didn't have that tenacity. He was kind of a bit scattershot, and he was also too afraid to please. So with Sherlock Holmes' Younger, Smarter Brother, he then followed it up with a film that didn't do too well, and he sort of stopped writing and directing. Well, if you see that with Woody Allen, he makes one film a year, and it doesn't matter if he fails. And that's sort of what makes him a great artist.
True.
Not a great person. We're not looking at that. It's aesthetics, not ideology.
Really liked The Woman in Red. I've got to say that.
Oh, you like? Okay, yeah, with Kelly
LeBrock.
Kelly LeBrock, yeah, that's it. From
Kelly
Weird
LeBrock
Science.
Kind of like yeah, she was my like teenage crush, like everybody else. And I think her downfall was when she then went on to marry Steven Seagal. Career seemed to just kind of go downhill since that moment. Tell you something trivial though. She was in a movie not that long back with my friend William Catt, you know, who played the greatest American hero, and they did a movie called Gamers, which came out in 2006. So I must ask him about her, actually, because I was always, you know, I was a big fan when I was a kid.
Yeah, please do. We'd like to hear.
Let's move on to Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, Jerry Lewis. Okay, so we'll start with your feelings on Jerry Lewis.
For someone with only 74 credits, I mean, his stuff was just iconic. You know, every time you turned the TV, he was on it, you know. Whether you liked him or not, he was already a household name. After his death, this video went viral about how he'd done an interview for these young filmmakers and he came across really arrogant. I don't know if that was students, but they just hadn't done the research and they were really sort of, you know, unschooled bunch camera crew, and he was quite arrogant and blunt. And then when they were finished, he was almost like, "Good, get out of my house now, thanks." But I kind of was on his side. You know, he's Jerry Lewis, for Christ's sake. He was of that old school Hollywood breed where he was untouchable. And, you know, when you're in the room with him, you weren't just talking to a schmuck. You know, you were in the presence of someone great. You know,
exactly, yeah.
And you couldn't have a Jim Carrey without a Jerry Lewis. And there was a thing that went online where Jim had actually gone into, I think it might have been Lewis's. It was a celebration of Lewis's. I don't know if it was a birthday or a credit. And the first thing Jim Carrey says to Jerry Lewis is, I'm I think he says something like, you know, I'm the son that got away, or, you know, you're actually my grandfather, or something along those lines. You know, I'm your unborn child, or something commemorates him.
Actually, I've got an interesting fact about Jerry Lewis. He invented video assist. So, you know, those monitors that they have on top of cameras and stuff like that. He invented that. He was one of the very first people in Hollywood to use a magnetic video camera and attach it on top of the camera, on the main camera, the cinema
that's
camera.
Incredible.
And he would record, and then he would play it back to see if it was worth doing again, if the actual performance or the camera movement was poor, in his opinion, as opposed to the actual, whether there's like a dust on the film or something. That's a different story. But
while you're on the topic, my favorite movie of his is actually The King of Comedy. And the strange thing about that was that, he was playing a straight dramatic role. And for me, that was probably my favorite movie that he's in.
He's really funny in it sometimes, though. Like when the woman yells him on the street?
There wasn't the wacky side humor. It was funny because it was just good comedy. But, the Scorsese movie with De Niro, it was just it was an incredible ingredient. I remember when I first found that just on the video shelf, and I couldn't believe there was a Scorsese movie that had Jerry Lewis and De Niro in it together. It just seemed kind of almost a bit unreal.
It's an amazing film, but personally I find it really funny in places because the characters seem really dangerous. Like, there's moments in the film that could, like, where the Jerry Lewis character could die. Like, he could get killed by these psychopaths, or they could do anything. Sandra Bernhardt character and the Robert De Niro character. And there's a scene where Jerry Lewis is tied up in this room, this apartment that's filled with candles. And Sandra Bernhardt's character is, like, wearing this negligee, and he's just tied up and he's just staring. You could tell what's on his face. He wants to get out of here. But she's sort of saying all these things like, I know you want me. And he's just like, you can see he's thinking, Jesus Christ, get me out of here. Like, it's so fucking hilarious.
That's genius. You're right. There were some classic moments in there. So, my friend, let's move on. I wanted to talk music. I mean, I know we opened this whole thing with Bowie, but I was also going to mention George Michael.
Absolutely.
Which had an impact on, obviously, I'm a big fan of his music. And stuff like that.
Like, which albums did you gravitate to? What made you gravitate towards him?
I think it was more just like the 80s hits, Careless Whisper, Wake Me Before You Go, tracks like that. I mean, they just played on repeat. They were in every club, every bloody radio station. Clubbing in my early days when songs like Faith came out, it was a big deal. The thing with George Michael is every time he brought out a track, it was a big deal, and he would have gaps in his, in the release of his tracks. Much like Romero was saying before, he didn't just pump out garbage. Every time he made a song, it was kind of because it meant something. And he said a very poignant thing. Now, and this actually works considering that this episode is all about the death toll. He said that he believed there was only two types of people in the world, and there were the people whose parents were still alive. And then there are the people whose parents had passed, majorly affected by the passing of his mother, and he was public about it, and in fact believed his entire kind of character himself as a person changed, dramatically. I think it's sad that he passed at only 53, but as far as soundtracks go to movies, Jesus, man, we're talking 250 credits. Now we should probably talk about Prince.
I didn't even see Purple Rain until way after.
It's funny because everyone I've talked to about Purple Rain, they've always seen it after. Even when it came out, I saw it after. But every time someone saw it, it was always late. But when they did, they were kind of like, kind of blown away by it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, totally blown away.
Prince has gone out at 57. I can't remember who exactly said it, but one of the comments on his passing was that he was music. It wasn't just like he played music. He was the music, and he could play so many different instruments, and he was such a multitasker when it came to producing music. And there definitely, isn't anyone else like him. There hasn't been. But, he's won an Oscar, music on Showgirls and Batman.
He did Batdance, didn't he?
He's got an Oscar for the bloody Purple Rain. I mean, and I've got to tell you, that's an incredible movie. It's really dark. It's I wouldn't say a horror by any stands, but there's sides to it that are really dark, and groundbreaking. I mean, this guy's just a fucking phenomenal artist.
How would you describe your first encounter with Prince's music?
I had a really good family friend who was quite switched on with his music, almost the same way I am with film. And, back in those days, you had audio cassette, and he had kind of slipped me this cassette that he'd handwritten on it. He'd dubbed this cassette, and he gave it to me as a present. I didn't know what the hell it was, and it was Prince Purple Rain, you know, and I was just a kid. And I eventually put it on, on my cassette player, my boombox. And I just kind of lost it. I just thought it was the most epic stuff I'd ever heard, and I was literally running around the house, you know, and just went nuts with it. I mean, the opening track, "Let's Go Crazy," I probably almost did go crazy, you know. And then I had to find the movie, and then that kind of led me into Prince's music. I mean, I kind of wasn't even a fan until I saw him in Purple Rain. And then I thought, wow, this guy's incredible. What else has he done? I didn't know as much about him before the film. So that was really cool.
So Bill Paxton, to me, was the ideal personality to see on film. Like, he was really accessible no matter what part he played. So if it was evil, like in, let's say, Near Dark, the 1987 vampire flick that didn't make any money because of Lost Boys. But
that is exactly right, brother.
Yeah, or whether, you know, he plays Private Hudson in Aliens. This is a bug hunt, man, a bug hunt.
Absolutely. Epic performance.
Or, you know, my favorite film, actually, of Bill Paxton, if you want to embody a film and a performance, my favorite film of his is the movie Trespass. Starring,
I love that film.
I fucking love that film. That's an underrated action film if there ever was any. With a
it really is
huge
soundtrack. Cast.
Yeah, exactly. And he plays a firefighter who's looking for buried treasure, basically. It encounters a gang of gangsters starring Ice Cube and Ice-T. And it's an amazing soundtrack. But his performance really grounds it. He's the least ridiculous element in the film, but he still manages to crank it up to 11 and make you laugh with him and at him. What about yourself? How do you...
Yeah, look, it's funny because we're doing Snakes and Ladders, I think, on this pod, because my favorite's going to be Weird Science, you know, like just as that prick older brother. I just think it was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing, bro. I mean, Chet, God, recited countless times the lines of his character.
Buttwad. You two donkey bits couldn't get laid in a morgue.
Yeah. Oh, mate, it's just epic, you know. And, you know, I loved him in Twister. I thought that's when he peaked, you know, as a leading man. That was his first kind of, you know, lead that I saw where I thought that's good. I mean, he's also in Predator 2, for God's sake. I mean, he's in a lot of stuff, you know. He's in Commando. He's in...
Is he in Commando?
Yeah, well, it says here, Commando. I'm struggling to remember myself. Must have been a featured extra. I don't know if that ended up in the cutting room floor. And he's in Terminator. I mean, Terminator, he was a punk. Yeah. You know, which
Laundry
is
day, nothing clean. Nothing clean.
But do you know what, man? I think my second favorite role of his is in Tombstone.
Yes.
Big fan of Tombstone.
Yeah, I love Tombstone. With it's got everyone who I admired growing up in terms of action heroes. Not Arnold Schwarzenegger, not Sylvester Stallone, but Val Kilmer, even though he's off scene. Kurt Russell, Big Trouble in Little China, and Bill Paxton. These people should have been in more action films as the lead star. Not these superhuman, gargantuan muscle men.
Bodybuilders.
Yeah, but these real kind of real people, even though they're a little bit better looking than in real life, than real life.
And he's really good in Edge of Tomorrow with Cruise. Like, he's really good in that. And he's also in Titanic, you know, and then let's not forget Apollo 13. Jesus Christ. Now let's move on to Alan Rickman.
Alan Rickman. That was my impression.
So you'd probably know him from Harry Potter, but I know him from, like, Die Hard.
No, I know him from Die Hard as well.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, he was amazing in that.
I'll cut his eye out with a spoon. And what's the line in it? Mr. Takaki, I'm going to give you to the count of 3. Don't let me count to 4.
Yeah.
Mr. Takaki won't be joining us for the rest of his life.
You know, it's really funny because, you know, he had a few movies in the 90s, but he really then had, I feel like there was a generational gap, and then he came back in the Potters as an older actor. So I feel like he kind of had 2 lifespans as an actor. One was, you know, earlier, and then one was much later. 69, won a Golden Globe, went out with 69 credits. Now that's pretty cool. He's got 69 credits for the 69 years he lived on the planet. That I kind of dig.
That's insane. And of course he was in the movie Galaxy Quest, which I think is his best role.
That's a cool film.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Sigourney Weaver as well. Yeah, that's right. Tim Allen.
Where Tim Allen's actually good. Like, it's weird to see him good in things because...
Yeah, I know. I agree.
He's not good in anything.
Now, you did mention my favourite movie earlier. You did mention Lost Boys.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about a death there, but this time it's not Corey Haim. We're going to talk about Brooke McCarter.
Of course.
So
Who was Marco?
Marco was Alex Winter. So Brooke played Paul. Mm-hmm. And he died at 52, which is very young. And unfortunately, he's only got 10 credits. The movie that I've had a look at recently, which prior to Lost Boys, is a movie called Thrashing, which I was amazed to find. Incredible actors. I mean, Josh Brolin is the lead in this movie, for God's sake.
Now, what's Thrashing about?
Thrashing's really kind of like a skateboard gang movie.
Oh, like Rad.
Yeah, it's like Rad in a sense. And Josh Brolin with Brooke McCarter. It's just incredible. But I think Brooke was that was a sad death, because he was so young, and I think he could have done a lot more. And you know what else I discovered, man, because I've been reading the new Lost Boys book that's come out called Lost in the Shadows. Mm-hmm. I actually discovered that Brooke was originally cast to play the role of David.
Really?
100%. I was shocked. And then when Kiefer Sutherland showed interest and they brought him in, it was like, oh, well, it's a no-brainer. We've got Kiefer Sutherland. We have to use him. Yeah. But then they said to Brooke, well, what do you want to do? And he was, because they thought he was going to be so upset that he would just walk. But then he said, no, how can I walk? I've got to be a lost boy, So he stayed in there. But but he was originally cast as a lead, which I just found, like, incredible. Yeah. And I think I mentioned on one of our pods that I've got a world exclusive coming up in relation to him, which I won't announce now, but I've got something happening to pay homage to him and his character. Brilliant. In the movie memorabilia pile. We'll just put that one for now.
I did have a list of familiar names, like Anton Yelchin was one of them, Miguel Ferreira, Mary Sony, who's in the movie Dogtooth, which is a really insane film from the guy who made Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. John G. Alvidson, who directed the first Rocky film. Don Rickles, who I used to find funny when I was young. Powers Booth, who played the best Jim Jones.
Of course. Tombstone again.
Exactly. Yeah, he's in Tombstone. He's in Southern Comfort. He's in Cruising. He's quite a versatile actor. I used to get him confused with Stacy Keach for some reason. But yeah, he looked like someone else to me all the time. And Red Dawn he's in as well.
But yeah, Adam West, look, what a legend. I don't know if I ever told you, but my favourite episode on his Batman series was when Batman and Robin went up against the Green Hornet, which was Bruce Lee, was Kato.
I thought I saw the whole series, but I haven't seen it.
This iconic episode where the Green Hornet and Kato go up against Batman and Robin, and try and hunt it down, see if it's on YouTube. It's just absolutely epic. I think in a sense Green Hornet was kind of, as far as the TV show goes, it was almost modelled a bit on the Batman and Robin, because they also had a car, and there was the two guys, there was the sidekick. Robin actually looks a bit like Kato. He's got the same glasses, the mask that he wears. So I think that was definitely studios looking at a product that worked to trying to sort of reinvent it in a slightly different genre or different show.
Anyone else on your list before we wrap this up?
I was just going to say, I don't know if you saw some of the NHP trivia, where I had I was going to talk more on a personal note to end out your 100th episode. But, for me personally, in every movie that I've made, there's always been someone that's passed. Unfortunately, there's normally been a crew or cast member that's passed. Did you know about this?
No, I didn't.
It's called the NHP Death Toll. If you go to my official Facebook page, you might find it there amongst the photos. I actually did a listing and called it the NHP Death Toll because it was almost getting ridiculous to the point where every single time I did a movie, someone was dying. And it almost became a bit scary. And when I was sort of about halfway through my own career, it got to a point where people were almost kind of a little bit ambivalent to get on set. Because I was like, if I do a film with him, am I going to live? It actually was a rumour. I was sorry to say, but my favourite Uncle Michael, who's a film set carpenter, he's passed during the shooting of my recent film. Now, not that he was in the film, but and I'm lucky I haven't had someone on set or from my cast and crew die on the last couple of films I've made. So I'm hoping that kind of, curse has been lifted, so to speak. But I was going to dedicate, this half of the pod to my late uncle, who was a film set carpenter, and actually I had the privilege to work with him on the set of Queen of the Damned. And he's got 34 credits on IMDb as a chief carpenter, and there's a whole bunch more that haven't even been added on there yet. In his passing, I inherited some of his cast and crew photos and whatnot, and I've got a beautiful one of us on the set of Queen of the Damned. I've also got another one of him on the set of Crocodile Dundee,
wow.
Which is amazing. It's the size of a headshot in black and white, and it's just epic. It's epic stuff. I don't know how much this would ever go if I tried to auction it, but yeah. So that's kind of my shout out is to good old Michael Hill, who also passed during the year. So it's sad, but as you and I know, we know it happens, and that's a part of life. And buddy, I just want to thank you for having me on this 100th episode. It's been an honour, and I'm congratulate you on all of your successes, and keep up the good work, because you've had some great talent come on the show and everyone's enjoyed it. They enjoy speaking with you, and your film knowledge is quite extensive. And I really have to put my thinking cap on to keep up with you sometimes in these pods. So that's a really good thing.
Well,
so thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathan. It's very noble of you to dedicate it to Michael Hill as well. I think that's a very good thing too. And but yeah, thank you very much for being with me with these many episodes. And I would also like to thank, of course, William Thompson, the co-host of this. Although we're not going to dedicate this podcast to him; he's too lazy to even get up to the fucking 100th episode. No, I couldn't have done it without him either. Happy 100, and I hope we have 100, 1,000 more episodes, and I hope to see you at the end of those 1,000 more as well too.
Let's hope so. Thanks, man.
Stay alive till next time. This series was produced by Sebastian Mittelman and devised by William Thompson and Sebastian Mittelman. Stay alive till next time. Oh, and a very special thanks to our associate producer Nathan Hill.